Welcome to this Ethical Point Explainer. Okay, let's dive right into a seriously fascinating dynamic today. That intense, sometimes overwhelming friction between high-pressure administrative duty and your own personal well-being. To really unpack this, we're going to frame it as a back and forth between a skeptical student and a seasoned mentor. You know, the student represents those very real, everyday anxieties of taking on massive public responsibility, while the mentor steps in to offer a philosophical, yet incredibly practical roadmap to actually thriving in public service. Let's get started.
So, here's our game plan for today. We'll hit the 2025 ethics dilemma, explore duty beyond the rulebook, and discuss finding the flow state. Then, we'll map out the virtuous cycle, practice mastering the main's answer, and finally wrap up with future trends and predictions.
Section 1. The 2025 Ethics Dilemma. We are kicking things off by tackling a highly demanding scenario straight from the General Studies Paper 4 syllabus. Right. Listen to this exam statement. One who is devoted to one's duty attains highest perfection in life. Now, imagine the student, our skeptic, reading this. They'd probably throw their hands up and ask, come on, how exactly can an aspiring civil servant achieve this so-called highest perfection when they're buried under crushing administrative stress, tight budgets, and relentless political interference? I mean, it sounds amazing on paper, sure, but how does that actually play out in the real world?
And here is exactly where our mentor steps in to frame the core argument. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's pause for a quick layman's definition of two absolute foundational terms, Karma Yoga and Svadharma. Svadharma simply means your rightful, inherent duty. Karma Yoga, that's the path of unselfish action. So the mentor explains that true perfection is rooted in the philosophy of nishkama karma, basically taking sincere action without becoming obsessed with the external rewards or the fruits of that action. It's all about consistency, integrity, and putting the public interest first, even when literally nobody is clapping for you.
Section 2. Duty beyond the rulebook. Let's look at how this kind of devotion elevates those routine, mundane tasks into deeply ethical public service.
We need to clearly define the public trust doctrine. In plain English, this doctrine is the bedrock idea that a civil servant doesn't just manage public money or resources, they hold them in trust for the citizens. It's a profound constitutional and moral obligation to uphold not just the literal text of the rulebook, but the fundamental spirit behind it. It's the ultimate anchor for everything you do. Grounding this doctrine in reality leads to some pretty powerful transformations. When you truly internalize this responsibility, your conscience actually becomes your ultimate internal auditor. You don't need a boss breathing down your neck to do the right thing. This is what gives an officer the moral courage to, say, resist intense political pressure when someone wants them to favor a specific contractor. It makes real empathy the norm in governance. And I love this mindset shift during a crisis. Instead of asking the limiting question, what am I allowed to do? The duty-bound officer asks, what must I do to serve the public good? You become a problem solver, rather than someone who just passes the buck.
Section 3. Finding the flow state. Okay, so to survive the immense pressure we just talked about, you have to undergo a massive psychological shift. Naturally, the skeptic hears all this and doubts it, assuming perfection just means snagging promotions, getting lucrative postings, or climbing the corporate ladder faster. But the mentor counters this by bringing in the concept of Eudaimonia. Eudaimonia, simply put, is human flourishing. It defines true perfection not as a rank or a fancy title, but as a deeply psychological and ethical state of well-being that you achieve through virtuous action. We're talking about genuine, profound inner fulfillment.
So the absolute crux of the matter is this. When your private values perfectly align with your professional actions, all that mental friction just disappears. This creates what psychologists refer to as a flow state. For a civil servant, doing your duty is no longer just clocking into a job, it becomes a calling. It gets intrinsically rewarding and emotionally satisfying because the gap between who you are and what you do entirely vanishes. You can see a sharp contrast between these two mindsets. The skeptic views success purely through external outcomes, reaching the top, seeking titles, chasing rewards. But the mentor is totally focused on inner perfection, hitting that flow state, finding deep satisfaction, and earning what we call a social footprint. A social footprint is that enduring legacy and tangible social impact an officer leaves behind by genuinely uplifting communities. Let's get some mud-on-the-boots examples of how this looks in the field. Picture an officer managing a disaster. A devoted one will ensure absolute transparency and relief aid, making sure it reaches the most vulnerable and actually saves lives.
In everyday welfare delivery, they'll find deep satisfaction in something as seemingly dry as tightening leakages in food distribution or bringing water to a parched village. Improving people's lives in these incredibly tangible ways gives you the larger purpose you absolutely need to stave off burnout. The work itself becomes the reward. Section 4. The Virtuous Cycle. Now these concepts, duty, responsibility, fulfillment, they don't live in a vacuum. They seamlessly link together.
They actually form a perfectly balanced virtuous cycle. Think about it. Your devotion to public duty leads directly to ethical governance. That deep sense of responsibility then generates immense public trust and respect. And effectively serving the public, that feeds right back into your own personal fulfillment and self-actualization. They constantly feed into one another, creating this powerful, self-sustaining engine for a lifelong career in public service.
But how do you maintain this cycle when the administrative overload is off the charts? Well, the mentor provides a step-by-step framework to balance devotion with prudence. First up, strengthen your ethical judgment through continuous mentorship and value-based training. Second, lean on institutional safeguards. Use tools like the Right to Information Act, audits, and whistleblower protections to actively support upright conduct. And third, perform a constitutional morality audit. This is a brilliant self-audit, a reflective practice where you regularly sit down and check if your decisions actually align with constitutional values like justice and equality. It's a game changer for managing stress and keeping your long-term commitment solid.
Section 5. Mastering the mains answer. Let's pivot from the philosophical debate directly to the exam hall. How do we take all these profound insights and turn them into a high-scoring 10-marker for the UPSC mains?
Here is a perfect template for your 150-word answer. Kick off your introduction by firmly establishing the philosophical roots. Explicitly drop standard definitions like Karma Yoga and Svadharma. Then, in your body paragraphs, quickly transition beyond the theory and into real-world application. Contrast duty with outcomes by bringing in the public trust doctrine, the flow state, and nishkama karma, and definitely reference those crisis management or welfare examples we discussed. Finally, your conclusion needs to synthesize the ultimate goal, linking effective governance directly with moral satisfaction. Seriously, memorizing a punchy, well-crafted conclusion exactly like this one guarantees you'll leave the examiner with a very strong, lasting impression. It cleanly and professionally ties the quotation from the prompt straight back to the gritty, practical reality of administration.
Section 6. Future Trends and Predictions. So, what's next? Let's extrapolate some trends to see where UPSC might throw these concepts at you in future exams.
Our skeptic rightly highlights these key areas, and they are spot on. As an aspirant, you need a full 360-degree mapping of these topics. Be totally prepared for independent questions asking you to define Greek concepts like Eudaimonia or Indian concepts like Karma Yoga, specifically in an administrative context. You should absolutely expect complex case studies that pit severe political interference against your core duty or cases that highlight the very real danger of burnout when duty is pursued without any balance. And for sure, you'll face ethical dilemmas where strict adherence to the rules directly conflicts with actually getting a positive outcome for the public.
We're going to wrap up this explainer with a provocative question to really test your analytical thinking. Take a hard look at the reality of India's administrative machinery today. With all the resource constraints, the rigid hierarchies, and the nonstop demand for results, does the current structure genuinely encourage that virtuous cycle of devotion we talked about? Or does it just demand raw, unfeeling output at the expense of an officer's inner perfection and mental well-being? It's a massively complex reality with strong arguments on both sides. Pondering this will deeply enrich your understanding of what public service truly means. Thank you so much for joining us on Ethical Point, and keep analyzing.